guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of On the Line. Now, if you guys don't know me, I host a show called Tear Talk, but I'm also considered a correctional advocate. And today I want to touch on how important it is for inmates to respect that chain of command. So this video is probably for the supervisors, but it's definitely got some information out there for the front line. But, you know, when you become a supervisor, you get that higher level of responsibility, but you also have the power, or rather say discretion, to override an officer's decision or to correct an officer's decision. And that's a lot of power to have. It's a lot of discretion to have. And it's not something you just want to go around doing for no reason. I mean, when you decide to override an officer's decision, or when you decide to use your discretion and go against an officer's decision, I want to be careful how I verbalize that, but either way, go against the officer's decision, you have to have a good justified cause. You're not just doing that at random. And when you do it, you have to go back to that officer in a private manner and explain why, and maybe give that officer the chance to change their decision. You know, this way the officer doesn't lose face, because we're all going to make mistakes, and as a supervisor, you're to help us correct it, be constructive with it. But the approach and how it's done is very, very important. It's very, very important. So again, maybe if there is a decision that has to be corrected, you go ahead to that front line, take them aside, tell them what's going on, and then give them the chance to correct it. This way they save face. Now, I want to combine that first thought, so hold on to that, with how inmates choose to play the game, how inmates choose to manipulate supervisors. Inmates look for a sense of power and control, and in a video we did in the past, we talked about how when you have that rank, you have a bigger span of control, but more importantly, you are able to oversee others. You have officers that are under your control, or if you're a lieutenant, you have sergeants and officers under your control, and you know, all the way down the line. So inmates, that's great for them if they can get a hold of the supervisor, because they have a bigger span of control that they can manipulate. So what they'll try to do, manipulative inmates, is they will try to divide and conquer. Okay, they will try to divide and conquer. And what do I mean by that? Is if an officer gives them a directive that is meant to be followed, and they have a supervisor that comes in the unit that just wants to be the inmate's friends more than he wants to do the job, more than she wants to do the job, well, we have a problem here. Because when the inmate has a concern and the sergeant just says, okay, don't worry about it, I'll talk to the officer, we'll be okay. Well, look what you just did. You just took the power away from the officer, and eventually that officer is going to start getting frustrated the more times you do it. That inmate did that on purpose, because that inmate was given a directive, didn't like what he got, and basically went from mommy to daddy, and daddy made the decision to override it. So all that does is open the door for it to happen again. That's one thing. But another thing is it stops the officer from doing their job, especially if it was a directive that's needed. And what you should have did as a supervisor was, if it's something that has to be done, you say, well, what did the officer say? Well, that's what it is. I stand by what the officer told you to do. And if there's any more concerns, you can bring it up back to that officer. And that's great, because that gives the officer back their power. That's the key, because the moment the inmate goes to you and you override that decision with really no justified cause, just because you're going to override it because you want to be buddy-buddy, well, you just took away the power from the officer. So the moment the inmate comes to you and asks you to override something or use your discretion against this officer who's given out a valid order, well, give the power back to the officer by telling the inmate, hey, listen, the officer told you was correct. You have any problems, go take it with the officer. And that's great. And the officers will love that. They'll take that as you're supporting them, and that would help empower them to do their job. Now, on the adverse, you know, if there's an order that really is kind of questionable, and the inmate comes up and says, hey, you know, this is what happened, and you as a supervisor says, well, maybe there's something up with that. I'll look into the matter. You know, you could always tell the inmate that, but how you address the officer is key. You bring the officer into a private area, give them the why, tell them why that directive may not be where it needs to be or why it needs to be changed, but give the officer the power to change it. Let the officer go back to the inmate. Let the officer, deal with it how they feel they need to deal with it, because they have to maintain that balance of control as it's done. So again, if the officer was wrong, it's not an extreme wrong. I'm talking about mistakes happen. Give the officer the chance to keep that power, because if you go there and you quickly change it without going to the officer and giving the officer the chance to change it, sometimes the officer can lose their sense of credibility, or at least through the inmate's perspective, their sense of competency. So it's good to give the officer that chance to, if they've fallen sort of, to have them pick themselves back up in front of the inmate population. But I thought it was a great video. We'll love your thoughts. As always, the show is on the line. Stay safe.